right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. Today, I have a very special return guest. He was on my show way back. It would have been probably sometime around 2020 or 2021. And I am welcoming back Mark Wolynn, and he is the leading thought leader in the field of inherited family trauma. And I bought his book way before I even went to college. I think I would have bought it the very first year the original came out, which was in 2016. And he is also the director of the Family Constellation Institute, and he is known for his work on how unresolved trauma leads to depression, anxiety, and chronic illness. His book, It Didn't Start With You, is an international bestseller. It won the Silver Nautilus Book Award for Psychology and has been translated into 40 languages. Mark has just released the 2025 revised edition of It Didn't Start With You and the official It Didn't Start With You workbook. And today we're going to get a little update from Mark, and we're going to talk about generational trauma. We're going to talk about breaks in the mother-child bond. And I'm really excited to welcome you back. So welcome, Mark. Thank you for coming.
Sandy, thank you for having me back again. Um, I'm happy to. I was telling Sandy right before we started, haven't podcasted for or bit or I haven't accepted invitations to be on podcasts for many years, and I've just come back out to do so. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to your listeners.
What I noticed, and this goes way back to when you were on my podcast when I first started, and this is really interesting, and this is why I really wanted to connect with you again, is because I was just starting out, and somehow Mark felt energetically aligned to record with me. So I didn't have a massive presence back then. I didn't have a huge audience. I was just starting. And that's how I knew, he's working from the heart and soul. And he wasn't looking at, okay, what can Sandy give me as a podcaster? And I just have to say, I really appreciate that. And I still remember that 6 years later or 5 years later.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I don't look at numbers. I look at conversations. I look at when somebody invites me, I listen carefully to the words and the invitation. And if I feel an alignment, I go on.
I love that. So let's begin with your story, Mark, because it's been quite a few years, and I think it's an important foundation to what you do.
Okay, yeah, I never meant to do what I do, so it's all quite by accident. Like many of us, I had symptoms that I couldn't explain. And this is, over 30 years ago. Oh my goodness, this is over 35 years ago. I began to lose the vision in one of my eyes. I was diagnosed with a chronic form of retinopathy, and the doctors couldn't cure it. And because of the way it was progressing, they told me I was going to lose the vision in my other eye too. And I was horrified. I didn't know what to do. Here I am. I was in my early 30s at the time. Um, and I just gave up everything to go on a search for how we heal. And literally, this search led me around the world, um, halfway around the globe. I mean, as far as Indonesia, where I learned from several wise teachers who taught me some fundamental principles, one of which was the importance of healing my relationship with my parents that had been pretty broken. Um, but before I could even do that, I had to heal what stood in the way, which was inherited family trauma, specifically anxiety that I had inherited from my grandparents who were all orphaned in some way. Three of them lost their mothers when they were babies and infants, and the fourth loses her dad at age 1. So ultimately, she loses her mother too in the grief. And this was the real cause of my vision loss, this anxiety. So it also created, a mom and a dad who didn't really have parents who had moms or dads, and um, breaks in the bonds, breaks in the mother-child bonds had also traveled down the pike, so to speak. So just like my parents, I had inherited this feeling of being broken from a mother's love because everybody was. And this was what was passed down in my family. Um, yeah, I remember a story, being a small boy. I'm maybe 5 or 6 years old, and when my mom would leave the house, I'd run into her room, panicked, and I'd pull open her drawers and I'd lift up her scarves or her nightgowns, crying into them, both thinking that I'd never see her again and that her smell would be the only thing I had left, which was true for all the grandparents who lost their mothers. I remember sharing this with my mom, and she told me she did the same thing when her mother left the house. So after healing the broken bond with my mom, my vision came back, which was crazy. I didn't expect it to. I just followed the course that was laid out in front of me, which was healing. And afterwards, when my own vision came back, I felt compelled to share these principles with people that I had learned. And ultimately, I developed a method for healing the effects of inherited family trauma and healing breaks in the mother child bond.
That is a powerful story, hero's journey. I think when a lot of us have that foundation, it's unfortunate that it happens to us, but it really strengthens a lot of why we do what we do. And I find that really fascinating, this mother-child bond. And you mentioned in your family lineage that there was that bond that was missing. I think I might have told you this on the last podcast. My father, his mother died giving birth to him. So
Yeah.
he never knew his mom. He never even had a photo of her, Mark, because this is like old school Croatia farmers. They were very poor. They never had a camera. They barely had enough food to eat. And she died. He doesn't even know where she's buried. And so my dad's going to be 88 in April. And he's great, other than this arthritis. And I've gone down that whole rabbit hole of this inherited family trauma and done what I could do, but he's older. He's like almost 89, so he doesn't want to listen to me giving him advice on what he needs to do to heal.
No, but it's important that you know it. You see, this is exactly the type of information that we need to excavate in our family. For example, so your dad has a break in the attachment, never meets his mom. She dies um, early, and the fight, flight, freeze responses that your dad that would be generated by your dad's autonomic nervous system to protect him from loss would be heritable. In other words, these would filter into the sperm cell that would become part of the zygote, with the fertilized egg of your mom. That'd be part of this information that passes forward. And you could be born with these feelings of being motherless, or these feelings of being all alone, or these feelings of being terrified, which are your dad's feelings, but they've come to you through epigenetics. So yeah, it's a major important story that you know that.
And then here's another thing that I read some research that this can go even in a more subtle way, this bond breakage between mother and child or mother and infant. Like my daughter, I had this like realization actually just last summer, Mark, that she was a trauma baby. She didn't come straight to me. They took her away. She was gone. They took her away to get her to start breathing. And my husband left the room. Everybody was there. I was there with one nurse. I'm like, I feel like I'm abandoned, like, and she's abandoned. And I read some research that that bond, because it wasn't initially with the mother and the child, and she didn't come back to me. I think it was maybe an hour later or something like that, that could have an effect too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's why there's the focus on skin to skin contact as soon as a baby's born. I mean, imagine this baby spent 9 months in the womb with your rhythms and sounds and fluid and smells and voice and all this incredible contact to be suddenly thrust out into the lights and to be taken away. That's extremely traumatic for the baby. The sensations of anxiety or terror or panic can feel intolerable. And that's, again, this is why we need to know, okay, if we're that baby and this was our experience of being pulled away from our mother for an hour, a day, a week, taken to the neonatal ICU, whatever the experience. We need to know these things because it gives us a hook upon which to hang the coat of the symptoms of anxiety, terror, panic that we've carried our lives. So I love that we're talking about your dad and your daughter because these are important details for all of us to begin to excavate. Mom, what happened to me? How was the pregnancy? What were you feeling during the pregnancy? Did you like dad? Did you want to be pregnant? Were you even married at the time? How was the delivery? How was et cetera, et cetera? We have to ask these questions so we can then have the archaeology, the landscape that shows us what happened to explain why we feel the way we feel.
And that makes so much sense because my son didn't have that experience, but my daughter did. And my daughter was that kindergartner who would basically be ripping my shirt off my body. Like I couldn't, like she had so much anxiety being separated from me that it was, I'd be like that mom, like looking around, and all the other parents are looking at me. And I'm like, what can I do? She's got to go to school. I got to let her go. But it was this terror that she had that my other child didn't have that experience.
Yeah, no, it's see, I'm so glad we're having this conversation in public because there's so many mothers and many of us as children that have these experiences, but we can't explain it. We have symptoms that we can't explain. And just that we're talking about this, how many of us as parents have that child that's terrified to go to kindergarten or nursery school or waits at the window till we come home from work with this terror of where's my mommy? Where's my mommy? I shared my story a few minutes ago. When my mom would leave the house, I'd panic as a young boy. And I never knew why. I had a nice enough mom. She was kind and loving, but her parents were orphans, both of them. My grandmother loses her mother at 2, and my grandfather loses his mother at 5. And then they get married. I often say systems marry systems. And so they have matching wounds. And now they get married and produce my mom, who is not able to be consistent in her emotional contact. She's erratic. And so when I say that I inherited this feeling of being motherless, it comes two ways. One is epigenetics. My grandparents' fight, flight, freeze responses go into the egg cell and sperm cell. But then, because my grandmother, an orphan at 2, can't really mother my mother with the fullness that's needed for that child, what my mother didn't get, she couldn't give. So I have a break in the bond that way too. A break from what I didn't get from her and what got passed down.
So I think last time we also talked about other forms of inherited trauma, if I can recall. Like, for example, if you had a grandparent that was in the war, as an example, and
Oh,
fought in the war, and they had very severe PTSD, that's carried through the lineage as well.
oh yeah. Absolutely. I won't give a war example if I gave a war example last time, but I mean, let's just all of us, let's say our life is it's on track. We've ticked off all the boxes. We've done all the right things. We've gone to a good college. We married the right partner. But every morning we wake up with a feeling of being incredibly alone, or we struggle with panic attacks and we can't place it because we don't know where it comes from. And just like you're saying, the answer could lie in a trauma that happened to one of our parents or grandparents. Maybe their mother or father died when they were young, as in the case of my family, or your dad or your mom was, in the case of your dad too, his mother dies young, or our parents were sent away to vacation with relatives or live with relatives, or they were placed in foster care, or one of their siblings died tragically. Something like this can devastate the family, and the reaction to the trauma doesn't necessarily stop with the people who experienced it. The feelings and the sensations, specifically the stress responses, as I said earlier, the fight, flight, freeze responses, the way the genes express, this can pass forward to the children and grandchildren, affecting them in a similar way, even though they didn't personally experience the trauma themselves. Does that make sense, Sandy?
It totally does. So essentially, I guess it all begins with understanding your story. But what if you have no one to ask? What if
Yeah.
you don't, you feel all of these things, but you have no parents, or you have no relationship, or you have no one to go to ask questions.
It'll come out in our behaviors. So, people always ask me this question, Mark, how do I know if I'm being affected by inherited trauma? And, because many of us feel like we're carrying something that doesn't belong to us. We have this fear, or this sadness, or this grief, or we're struggling with a health condition that we can't explain, panic attacks, or chronic exhaustion, or an autoimmune illness. And we can't put it together because our parents were good enough. So I tell people that, look for these signs, because I've discovered that we can begin experiencing a fear or a symptom that strikes suddenly or unexpectedly when we reach a certain age, age 30, and all of a sudden, like, we wake up with a feeling that we didn't have in our 20s. And I'll talk more about that as we go, because it's not just certain ages. That's one of them. We'll hit a certain age and boom, we begin to have a symptom, an anxiety, a fear. But also, we can hit a certain milestone or an event in our lives. For example, as soon as we get married, and then we shut down and we can't explain it, but it's linked to our grandmother who became a widow at 25, and then she never married again. And she stayed alone. And then our mother got divorced in the mid 20s and she stayed alone. So there's this energy, there's this actual experience of aloneness in your mid 20s. And then you hit your mid 20s, you leave your relationship, and you don't know why you leave it. It looks on, if you look at the, oh, I just didn't, we just weren't. But no, it's deeper. It's not just we weren't connecting. There's a deeper biological energy, almost energy, information in the genome that can be moving forward, that looks at these triggers. I'll give you another trigger. So I talked about ages. I talked about milestone or event. Another one of these milestones or events is we suddenly we move to a new place, and then we start to become depressed without connecting it to the fact that our ancestors were persecuted or they were forced out of their homeland and they were depressed. Their lives shifted. So the sensation of moving, the experience of moving does it. Or I'll give you another one. We get rejected by our partner, and the grief is insurmountable. We don't think we're going to get through the pain, but we were only with them for 2 months. It doesn't make sense. We were only with this person 2 months, and then we feel, oh, I don't want to live, because what it's doing is taking us back to something we don't remember. Let's talk about your father. In his case, he lost his mom without ever meeting her. So any rejection or aloneness could affect him more deeply than the average person. For example, a rejection by a partner goes can take us back to losing our mom, or not, or having a disconnect with our mom, and or feeling rejected by our mom. Our mom was too busy, and so we have to look at healing the break in the bond, because this rejection is sort of like a direction sign saying, go down here, feel this feeling, and work on this. I'll give you one more milestone or event, because you're asking me a good question. What if they don't have information? And my answer is, look at your life. You don't need the information. Your life is the template. Your life is the canvas. It's showing you what happened in previous generations. I'll give you an example. Um, I worked with this woman. Everything's cool. Her life's going great. And then she has a child. And all of a sudden, she's a nervous Nilly. She's frantic that something terrible could happen to her child. It's as though there's this ancestral alarm clock inside us, or inside her specifically, that starts ringing. And this woman, now she's consumed with anxiety now that she's pregnant. And I sitting with her, and I go, talk to me about what's the feeling, what's the worry, what's the fear. And she said, well, I could harm my baby. And I said to her, did you ever harm a child? She said, no, of course not. And I said, then I asked her, of course, the what I call in the book the bridging question. Did anybody in your family ever harm a child? And she was about to say no. She said, no, of course not. And then she went, oh my God. And all of a sudden she lit up like a Christmas tree. She said, my grandmother, as a young woman, lit a candle, and it caught the curtains on fire and then the house on fire, and she couldn't get her baby out, and the baby died. And then she said, but we were never allowed to talk about it. And in that moment, what does she do? She makes the link that changes her life, that she'd inherited this terror from her grandmother, and then we could break the pattern.
Whoa, that's powerful. That's powerful work because often I say, Mark, in this modern day life, and you and I were just talking about how, like, I crave quiet. I crave it. I need to have moments of quiet because the reflection helps me. And I think it's almost gotten worse in modern day living, where with the scrolling and the constant, influences coming into us, that we don't have the time, or we don't make the time to do some of this important reflection. Because now that you're talking and we're having a grounded conversation, I can say you're talking about, like possible fear of abandonment or whatever. And then if you really go down that path, like I know I have some of that, and I know I'll do a lot of this people pleasing. It's like, let me just try and make everything fine. So everything's fine. And I'm not abandoned. Like, I normally, a lot of people don't take the time to think. And
I
then when
love that
you
you did that. I love that because, so I'm going to use what you just said to launch us into a conversation. So we have a break in the attachment with our mom, let's say. And now the body is generating fight, flight, freeze responses to feel safe so that we don't get hurt again, that nobody rejects us, so that we fight is tight and flight is get me out of here and freeze is shut down the feeling. And these fight, flight, freeze responses are unbearable to feel. So we adopt strategies that make us not feel them and are make us relatively successful. We become a people pleaser. If we make people like me, because if I or become very very smart, so I'm needed by people, or become uber independent. Don't rely on people because we don't think the next step that they could reject us. But that's why we've become so smart or people pleasing or independent or efficient or capable or nice or whatever strategy we've adopted to not feel the unbearable fight, flight, freeze responses that feel crappy in our body. But that's where we have to go in order to heal it. Other than that, the personality is a um, hodgepodge of different strategies that we've designed to feel safe.
Yeah, and you see this all the time. It's this whole self-abandonment of coming back home to the self because of all of those strategies that you just mentioned and many more, I'm sure.
No, it's exactly right. And the work in healing to heal these things as we're saying is just to go there, to go in and feel it and not be afraid of it, and then to integrate it in the energetic core of the body, to be able to stay with what's uncomfortable until we reach deep to the sensations in our body that are positive or life-giving, like pulsing, tingling, heart beating, um, energy moving. These positive experiences of being able to stay with the positive sensations. That's how we heal. That's how we change our brain, um, and that's how we create new neural pathways. And that's how we also begin to stimulate the release of feel good neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, or feel good hormones in our body like estrogen or oxytocin. Even the very genes that we involved in the body's stress response, they can begin to function differently in a new and improved way. And not even once we heal it, we don't have to even pass it forward to our kids. We can change the way our DNA expresses. But that's what we're talking about, is being able to go in and be with these sensations, body softening, um, energy expanding, life force flowing. That's the key.
Yeah, that's extremely powerful, but I do believe a lot of people don't want to go there, Mark. And you can't make somebody go there, right? You can't make someone do the work. And that's like everybody that I have interviewed who are really these thought leaders in improving the self, the first step is to say, I want to explore this.
Yeah, well, you said it yourself, we can't force that. But after a while, we probably get tired of our own reactivity and tired of pushing people away, or tired of being in a relationship and feel like we love through a glass wall because we can't fully connect, or we can't receive, we can't take in love. And we hit this wall so many times that we say, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready. Look, that's why I wrote the book. Um, all the books, really. I wrote all the books to help people go in, and I try to make it painless as possible. And that's, I think, what I'm known for, being able to explain difficult concepts very simply, but also to take people into healing in a very feel good, simple way. Um, so, that's my mission. My mission is to help those of us who suffer and don't know why we suffer, and then to give us a path forward um, into our own healing process.
Talk to me, because you kind of touched on it a little bit about patterns. You know how you see patterns in families, and often it'll be like the same mistakes. Like you touched on it just now.
I've
You
been
know,
touching on it.
yeah, yeah. Like, let's say, you see one young mother become pregnant and a single mom at age 16, and then her daughter repeats it, and then and you see these repeated patterns. How that goes back to where,
Uh,
Mark?
the answer to that is some of it's epigenetics, but not all of it. Some of it is unconscious loyalty. And we really don't know how this works. But there are, epigenetics, that's easy. You have a trauma, you have a response to the trauma, the response to that trauma goes in the epigenome, and then the kids and the grandkids carry that response to the trauma. But what you're saying is, how does our father's brother, our grandfather's brother die at 20, our father's brother die around 20, and our own brother start to get a health condition around 20? How does that happen? And, as best as I can say, there seems to be, we're inside this greater soul that wants healing. And so it keeps throwing up these patterns, forcing us to look at um, how we heal. It makes me think of a case I worked with the other day. Um, a 40-year-old woman, she doesn't understand why she leaves all her relationships just after a few months. I mean, her longest relationship is 9 months long, and she's 40. But otherwise, her life is great. She's very successful. She's a lawyer. She has lots of friends. But when I ask her, what do you feel when you're in a relationship? What's the feeling? She said, well, I feel trapped, disconnected, and disgusted, she said, whenever they make love to me. And I'm going, whoa, okay, let's get the story behind that. Tell me about your mom. Tell me about your grand. Well, it was just as far as her mom. This is amazing, though. Her mother was deeply in love with her high school sweetheart. And he tells her, look, I got to leave town for a little bit, but I'm coming back. And when I come back, we're getting married. Well, she doesn't believe him. So she starts dating and she gets pregnant by my client's father. So when the guy returns, the love of her life, he finds her pregnant and refuses to marry her. So reluctantly, she marries my client's father and lives this trapped, unhappy life. And now, loyal to her mother, my client carries this feeling of trappedness and unhappiness in her relationships and feels disgusted when she makes love to her the guys she dates, like the mother felt disgusted making love to the guy that wasn't her great love. Now, this is going to travel down. If this woman were to have children, she didn't have children, but if it were, we'd see a similar pattern that is asking to be healed. Does that make sense, Sandy?
Totally.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And then, but it's like, you've got this giant puzzle, and whether all the pieces are there or not, you're working with what you've got, and you notice at, I guess, symptoms in your body, like you said, the anxiousness, the fight flight feeling, and then you look at patterns, Like, for example, this lady who leaves every single boyfriend after 9 months and can't keep a relationship. And somehow you break that down to how to heal it.
Going back to this story, so look, we as parents, our children are our legacy, but we have to ask, as parents, what are we really handing down? This mother who marries this man who the client's father, and shuts down. Obviously, fight, flight, freeze responses never heal. So when he touches her, she tightens or she shuts down or her body goes into a flight response. That is mom's job to heal that. Well, she doesn't. And now the daughter's picked it up and now she's experiencing her mom's experience, which didn't even start with her. So each of us has to do our own work, our own inner work to look at why we feel the way we feel. So these things don't get passed forward. I mean, I don't know how else to say it other than we've got to look inside for the sake of our children and our grandchildren. Not only ourselves, of course, but ourselves would be um, ourselves would be reason enough.
Yeah. So I guess, like this work is important. And can it potentially help with traumas that we encounter that are not inherited?
Well, yeah, I mean, most of my practice is working with breaks in the mother-child bond, which are big T traumas. So when I'm working with people, Sandy, I ask one question. I say, Sandy, don't answer this, Sandy, but I say, I'm going to use your name. Sandy, did you feel seen by your mom? Really seen? Did you feel known by her, that she could intuit what you needed and then give it to you, and then could soothe you, comfort you, so you could just nurture in her care? Now, don't answer that, but that's the question. And I'd say 85% of the people say, I did not. And when they say that, that is a big T trauma, big T. When we didn't feel seen and known and soothed by our mom, we're carrying that trauma that's not inherited. That's this life. That's this childhood. That's from conception through the pregnancy all the way up to age 10 or so. A trauma that must heal so we can have good health, good relationships, good vitality, good success, etc., etc.
Yeah. I mean, I think look, this is an amazing conversation because truly I think the world would be just a better place if everybody even did a little bit of this work, Mark. That's just my
That's
opinion.
what I say. That's always because I always get asked these questions about the political environment. I always get asked, and my answer is always, I just step back and I look at this side and look at that side, and always feel that if we just did our own trauma work, we'd be less influenced by what's happening around us. You know, if we become freer inside, our ideas about ourself, our ideas about the world, our ideas about everything really becomes less shaped by those around us. We care less about what people think and can make clearer, more embodied choices. We have to do our work. We just have to do our work.
Yeah, and less triggers, right? You know how they always say if and this is something I've learned, Mark, you're going to laugh at me, but I've learned if I have a disagreement with my mom or my sister or my husband, listen, I'm a little bit of a fiery Eastern European woman. So, you can't take the fire out of the woman. But at least now I've learned to step back and then reflect and go, okay, I got triggered by this.
Great.
Let me look at why I got triggered by this because it's just a mirror, right?
Brilliant. That is so, I'm so glad to hear you say that because I know you do it, or you wouldn't be doing what you do in the world. You wouldn't be bringing uh, information to help people heal unless that was your journey as well. So, absolutely, we've got to look at our own triggers and get curious about them and say, okay, my wife and I had this fight, and all she did was do this. And I'm experiencing, wow, let me get curious about that. And a lot of times that happens, and I'll go to her later and I'll say, honey, I'm sorry. I was feeling this because of this. But in order to make these connections, we have to do our inner work. We have to look inside.
100%.
It-
So let's get into just a little bit. I just have a couple questions about your book because I
okay.
have your original book. It didn't start with you. And I know I haven't seen the new one yet, but there's something that you speak about core language. Do you want to get into that? Like, what does that mean, core language? How do you break that down?
Well, core language is the trauma language we speak, and we don't do it consciously. These words just come out. So, for example, I found a way to, uh, I mean, I could show you. One of the questions I get asked all the time is, Mark, how do you know it's a generational trauma we're struggling with or an attachment trauma that we struggle with? And I developed a tool in both books. The first one that you have in the new book that called the core sentence, and it's literally helps us differentiate between the two types of trauma. Let me show you how it works. So the core sentence is asking you a question that will bring up some of your trauma language, what I call core language. So I'm going to ask it to the listeners, and listeners, do not do this if you don't feel safe doing it. Take care of yourselves. But here's the question I ask. If your life were to fall apart, if things went terribly wrong, what's your worst fear? What's the worst thing that could happen to you? And then when you answer that inside your body, keep bringing it deeper and deeper by saying, okay, if that happened, then what? What's the worst part of that? And if that happened, then what? What's the worst part of that? And you'll get down to a sentence that'll create a reaction in your body. And that's the core sentence. And it can go in two different directions, generational or attachment. If it's attachment, the sentence will sound like this: I'll be all alone, or I'll be abandoned, or I'll be rejected, or I'll be left, or I'll be helpless, I'll be powerless. These are sentences of your trauma language that tell you likely we're looking at a break in the bond with the mother. But then there's this other type of language that sounds, well, where did that come from? And it's generational. Some people will answer, when I say, what's your worst fear? What's the worst thing that could happen? They say, I'll be hated by everybody, or I'll do something terrible. I'll harm a child and I won't deserve to live. Or, you can hear that language. Where does that come from? That's definitely generational language. And that tells us we might be looking, the next question will be, did anyone in your family ever harm a person or a child? Just like I told you that story a little bit ago about that woman who said she's fine, but then she gets pregnant and is worried she could hurt her child. And when I asked her, did anyone in your family ever hurt a child? And she was about to say no. And she went, wait a minute. And she talked about the fire that the grandmother lit. and couldn't get that baby outside. So there's definitely, I'll give you some more generational language. I'll go crazy. I'll be locked up. Well, let me ask you a question. Did you have a grandmother or a grandmother's sister or great grandmother that was institutionalized? Or I'll be sent away. I'll be forgotten. Well, who was sent away? Who was forgotten? Or one of my favorites, I won't deserve to live. Or I don't deserve, and well, wait a minute, who did something in the family and felt that they didn't deserve to live? Do you see where it goes, Sandy? How it can go this side or that side?
Totally. And then you have the book and then you have the workbook so that you can kind of work through it on your own as well if you want to.
Yeah, yeah. Let me show everybody the book.
Yeah.
So this is the new book. It just came out, and it's the revised book. It's 35% larger, and it's completely different. So, what happens in this book is all the new science in the last 10 years, as well as all my new insights in the last 10 years, is in this book. um, a lot more about attachment, uh, um, many new case studies. Um, One of the things that happened in the last 10 years is all the science with humans came out. Sandy, remember in the first version, I talked a lot about mice because that's all we had back then. Now there's a ton of new research with humans that are just startling. I'll tell you an example. They looked at in 2025, they did a study where the researchers examined war-related violence in 3 generations of Syrian refugees that had experienced war, and they discovered an intergenerational epigenetic signature of violence that's embedded in the genome. Specifically, they saw epigenetic changes. What they were looking at was DNA methylation. That's technical. We don't need to worry about it. But these epigenetic changes were found in the pregnant grandmothers who were directly exposed to the war violence, and then their daughters who were prenatally exposed because they were in the womb, and then the grandchildren because the eggs of the inside our mother, who's in our grandmother's womb, we're in that womb too after 5 months of being pregnant. So the grandchildren were prenatally exposed, germline exposed, you could say, to the violence. And they could see the same signature in all 3 generations. That's one study. I could give you a gazillion that are in this book. I'll tell you one more. This is interesting too.
Okay.
So in 2017, they looked at Brazilian grandmothers in a particular city. I think it was São Gonçalo, the city, and these grandmothers that were exposed to partner violence while pregnant with their daughters. And then these daughters would then become mothers themselves. And the researchers discovered that they were able to pass the effects of that violence onto the grandchildren. Um, so anyway, the book, here it is again, is filled with all the cool science with humans that's come out in the last 10 years, all my new insights. It's like a completely different book. And then um, boy, I feel like I'm self-promoting. I hate to do this
No,
stuff.
no, I want to hear about the
Okay.
the
All right.
workbook
And
too, because
then
that's
all
new
right.
too.
All right. And then I wrote this workbook, and it's like having a private session with me. So in the workbook, I love these books. I love these. I love this workbook because what it asks you to do, there's all these uh, questions and graphs and charts. What it asks you to do is to stand in your own family constellations. So I have the readers literally put shoes on the floor and stand as their mothers or their fathers or their ancestors or their grandparents or their younger selves. I have You stand in shoes as you when you're young, and then your mother and your father, and to be able to experience what you felt that you can't remember because it viscerally will show up in the body. So there's this for those who want to take their personal work more deeply. And then there's this for people who, want to read about this stuff. And there's lots of course, work in here I ask people to do too. But there you go. There's the two new books I'm excited about.
Well, I'm excited about it too because I am always up for self improvement and self discovery because anything that's, I mean, I'm a lifelong learner. I'm always going to try and learn more and then also improve more because, you look back at your stories of when you were 25 and there's some people who never really change or evolve. And then there's some people who are like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that when I was 25. I'm such a different person today, right?
Yeah, no, and Sandy, that's why I accepted your podcast all those years ago, because I could tell when you wrote me, I could see your sincerity and your depth. And again, here it is. You probably have a great listenership of people that also do their personal work because of who you are. I often see that the um, podcast reflects the audience, and the audience reflects the podcaster.
Yeah, that I agree with because this is why you and I talked about this. I'm always about the science. I think the science is really cool and really interesting, but then you have to blend it with the soul and you have to blend it with bioindividuality because no, we aren't robots. And so this is why I resonate with your work. It's very individualized and you kind of keep digging in to get into the nooks and crannies of your story, not what, fits into this box.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm big on the science as well. But then, just like you said, we have to then go into the soul. We have to expand in our um, energetic core and expand our sensations of aliveness and vitality to heal. Um, yeah, I mean, I agree. I could talk all day about the science if your listeners want. I mean, just ask me to do that. But I think we're now talking about something that goes beyond the science.
I think so too. And I think, that might even be a whole other conversation because with this, there's a very specific way in which you can begin to unravel your story and understand it. And then I think your book probably will go into more of the soul and the healing side of it, correct?
Yeah, and I'm writing a new book even as we speak, and that'll be out next year, which I'm excited about, which even goes further in that direction. Um, yeah.
I love it. I love it. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you would like to touch on, Mark?
I think we got it. I mean, I could just say it. I could just say a couple simple things, maybe that we have to know that memories of trauma, they get imprinted in our parents and grandparents' sperm cells and egg cells, and then that information just passes forward to us, and then as a result, we're born with altered brains and fight, flight, freeze responses that prepare us biologically to cope with these traumas um, that were similar to the ones that our parents or grandparents experienced, but we didn't experience. And it's kind of crazy because these we, yeah, I don't even I don't even know where to go from there. But we're like a walking, um, oh gosh, I don't even have an image for it, but a walking expression waiting for the right trigger to bring out this material, these that's been latched onto our DNA, and the triggers on the outside, the ages, the experiences, the events, the milestones, the people, the relationships, it's just waiting for this information to burst forth. That's why we have to look at it, because our behavior, how we respond in certain situations, is tied to this.
Yeah. It's almost, I just got this like, visual of, not wanting to look at the monsters under the bed. Like, as a child, right? Like you're like sitting there shivering and shaking and terrified. And then you finally look and it's just a bag that's under the bed. You know what I mean? Like, and then,
Oh,
so it's like sometimes we gotta look in order to just
and Sandy,
relax.
an interesting bag too. I find that many
Yeah.
people who open up this inquiry into genealogy become the genealogists in their family, because what happens is it's fascinating material to see, wait a minute, my grandmother had a sister, the same thing that happened to my mother's sister and my sister, and we start to look at these connections, and we start to say, this is fascinating. And then we become a spokesperson for, generational trauma, because we know how essential it is to look at these things.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Mark. I'm so happy to reconnect with you. I really appreciate you and your work.
Well, thank you, Sandy. I was happy to have this conversation. I think we went deeper this time, and I love it. So thank you for having me back on your show, and all
Thank
the
you.
best to you.
Thank you.